Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. Guys, I got a good tip for you today, and it's something that often goes overlooked anytime you're fishing docks. I got to give you a little background story on this first. Years ago, I must say 2017, I fished an event in Lake Travis down in Austin, Texas, which is a clear water, highland impoundment, tons and tons of docks. And that was something that I went there and I wanted to fish was docks. I love fishing docks, and I had so little success. It was bothersome because I knew that there were fish using those docks. And all the research I had done on the lake before suggested that docks would be a major player. We were there right during the pre-spawn phase. There were some fish that were starting to move up into spawning areas, and then there were fish still out on the main lake and deep in wintering phase. So it was one of those things where I just knew the docks would be a player. But after like the second or third day of the practice period, it was probably about 2.5 days in. So on the third practice day, I was really frustrated. I went out and I'm like, I'm going to commit to the docks and see if I can make this work before I completely write it off. And I fished for like 2 hours, never had a bite. And I remember pulling out of a pocket. And as I'm like on the trolling motor, just working my way out, there were probably 3 or 4 docks that were tight. So I just figured I'd use the trolling motor to get out. I happened to go over one of the cables out in front of the dock. And when I did that on my 2D sonar, I saw some fish. And I was like, okay, they're probably crappie or something. But the way they were set up, suspended halfway down, probably in 20 foot of water over like 40 feet. So I just happened to flip I had a little swim bait on. I flipped it back into that direction as I continued to work my way out of the pocket and caught one, 2-pounder, which was kind of a decent fish in that tournament. So at that point, I'm like, okay, well, just a fluke, whatever. I'm still working my way out, or as I'm fishing or catching that fish, working my way out, I went over one of the dock cables for another dock in that little pocket. And I saw the same thing, and the light bulb goes off, and I'm like, I got to try this. Well, it turned out, for whatever reason, the bass were holding on the cables, and they were not under the docks. So the tip for you guys is to not write off the dock cables. Dock cables are something that I have seen be a major player over the years since that experience. And I know this is something that a lot of other guys do, but you don't hear people talk about it often, because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I really don't understand why a bass would hold on a dock cable that provides pretty much no cover, right? It's not like they're under the dock where there's a bunch of shade. They're just holding on that dock. It's almost that idea of like the ostrich thinks he's hiding because he puts his head in a hole. Well, it's almost like the bass thinks he's hiding because he's got a little wire to hang behind and nobody can see him there. The reality is, though, the bass use them. I can't explain why, but they use them. I also think they kind of like them because they're vertical in the water, and bass do like to hold on vertical cover. But the thing is, I've seen fish move back and forth to it. And one thing I'll point out is I see this more frequently earlier in the pre-spawn phase. It's almost like the fish that are in deep water will come up the drain or the ditch into a pocket, and then they run into the big cement block that holds that cable, and then it's almost like they follow the cable up to the dock. But it takes them a little while to get from that deep water where the cinder block is up the cable to suspending under the dock. It's almost like they're pulling up, holding on the cable, waiting for the water temperature to rise for them to get closer to the spawning period, and then they move under the dock where they can get the shade or get some of the warmth coming off some of the floats, or even potentially spawn at the base of that dock. But it's one of those transitions that I feel like the fish, I firmly believe that fish don't like to move drastically in the water column up and down. There's something with their air bladder that just doesn't sit right, and it's almost like they swim to that cable, and it takes them, a few days to come up 20, 30 feet on that cable to get to the point where they're interested in going under that dock. But this is something I see all over the country. This has happened. I don't have many floating docks in my area, but there are marina docks and things like that that have big cables that come off of them. You go down south, most people that live on a lake that has water fluctuation have floating docks. Most of them have cables. And it's something that you see happen a lot. And this is, not just a largemouth spotted bass or smallmouth thing. It works with all of them. Now, I do want to point out a couple of things with respect to fishing the cable. One, they can be pretty snaggy, so you do got to recognize, where you're casting, what baits you're using, and you got to be prepared to hit the cable, because if you set the hook as soon as you feel that cable, you're going to get stuck a lot more than you will if you're aware of that cable and expecting to run into that cable. The other thing is you kind of have a couple of sweet spots, in my opinion. The first is going to be the base of that cable, where you do generally have a big cinder block pile holding it. The next is going to be where the actual cable comes off of the dock and enters the water. And then the next is going to be if you have two cables that cross. So sometimes you have two cables that cross, and generally where that cross is going to be a good holding area. Now, having said that, they can be anywhere. They can be suspended 20 feet down, like that instance on Lake Travis, but they can be anywhere along that cable. A lot of times the suspending depth comes into play with the bait. So if you're seeing the bait down in 15 feet, the bass are generally going to be suspending around that 15-foot mark. From a bait selection standpoint, like I said, you can get stuck on those cables a lot. So you want to choose wisely with respect to that. One of my favorite baits, and one of the most annoying to use when fishing them, is a jerk bait. A jerk bait like this Berkeley Stunna is just going to be one that if it comes in contact with that cable, you might get hung up. But it's a really good bait at drawing fish from the cable. So if you have good recognition as to where the cable is in the water, the jerk bait's going to be a really good bait to draw the fish to you without getting snagged. Now, if you get snagged, though, you might be losing $15 to $25 depending what jerkbait you're using. So because of that, I also like to throw little swim baits. A little swim bait coming along those dock cables is a great player, as well as a Demiki rig type setup where you've got your 90-degree jig head and you can fish this vertical. And then last but not least, I like to throw something like the hover rig here. Some people like to throw Neds, but I do like to throw them when they've got the weed guard built in, and that prevents you from getting snagged on that dock cable. Personally, the hover rig is one I love to use just because of the falling motion, the spiraling, and the gliding all over. And then again, you're not going to get snagged up. But I try to keep it pretty simple when I'm fishing those cables. The fish that are on them, if they're active, they're generally feeding on shad. So your dying shad motions or your shad imitating baits are going to be some of your best ones. But I can assure you guys, this is some of the most untouched cover out there. People will go down fishing the dock all day long, but they very rarely make casts specifically at the dock cables, and the fish are using them. They are suspending out away from the dock on those dock cables, and they're going very, very under pressured when you compare them to the surroundings. So give it a try. Next time you head out to a lake that has some cables that are holding some docks in place, I assure you, this is the time of year where those fish are really starting to use them well. So thanks for watching, guys. Stay tuned. We'll have a new tip video coming out tomorrow for you.